Sahana vavatu, sahanau bhunaktu, saha viryam karavavahai, tejasvinavaditam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we have a topic before us, unfolding levels of consciousness. And with every subject, we can be assured of two things. Firstly, it'll be repeated themes, because as I often say, I don't really say anything new, and I try to repeat the same things because the principles of the Vedanta that we're studying are extremely simple. Essentially, there is one totality, one entity existing. We call this Brahman. And then we have a quintessential essence in ourselves, Atman. Atman and Brahman are one and the same. And then this world is mithya. This world is a fleeting, changing thing that is unreliable in its steadiness. Put into the local context, that is you and me, we have a body that is sometimes vibrant and healthy, other times a little shaky, sometimes suffering from discomfort, other times beaming with health, depending on how we treat it and depending on other circumstances, and a jumping mind that wants to go all over the place. Overall, an unsteady picture that requires steadiness. This steadiness we can call dharma. Now, there is a theory of evolution that people think started in the 19th century with Wallace and Darwin and so on, and has come to be known in modern times as the modern synthesis, or the neo-Darwinism. Is simply an addition of some very useful information about the central core of every cell, the nucleus called deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, and also the idea of inheritance. That is a study from studying peas and what have you. And all of this has been brought together, but new investigations has shown much more complexity within the cell. But you see, this is nothing new or modern, because way, way back, many thousands of years ago, we have evolution being explained by the ancient yogis. And if we want to pick this up, then we can take the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which is there in 4 sections. And this is contained along with a comprehensive preliminary commentary by Swami Vivekananda under the title Raja Yoga, a royal path, because we're dealing essentially with the mind. It is the mind that is in the way of everything. By purifying the mind itself becomes an illuminator, reflecting the truth and beauty of this Atman that we have mentioned before. A kind of beaming thing within, where we're able to think, where we're able to feel, and we're able to act. We can summarize it as divine light, divine life, and divine love. Now, if we say that there's a more ancient concept than contemporary idea of evolution, then we'll have to explore when it occurred, and is there any difference between the modern view of it? Well, we have to go way back to the yogis, as I mentioned, but they have a different idea that we might be able to call the flow theory of evolution. The flow theory of evolution visualizes a kind of unfolding. Something is not invented, something is not discovered, something is not presenting itself in any way. nothing is random. There is a steady progress, a steady purpose, a steady direction, which means it comes from something and it's going to something. And the Upanishads tell us this, that we come from something and that something is involved in the journey and it'll take us back to the origin. In other words, it's seen not as a progression in a linear sense, but a progression in an unfolding sense that has a circularity about it, a cyclical pattern. And then we don't know where the starting point is. Because if you take a circle, where's the starting point? You can take any point on the circle. You don't know when the beginning is. You don't know when the end is. It's just infinitely going round, A, B, A, B, A, B. Which came first, A or B? We have no idea. So taken in this way, evolution, devolution, all of it seems to be the same cycle. And so if we have the mind, which seems to be some kind of obstacle that requires refining, then we'll discover it's not really an obstacle. It's only the untrained mind, the undisciplined mind, the undirected attention that becomes a difficulty for us. But when trained, when directed, it becomes our best friend. Not only our best friend, it becomes our teacher, and it becomes our illuminator. And each step of mental refinement becomes a kind of unfolding. We might call this, as I say, a flow theory of evolution. And is described in some wonderful stanzas, or I should say sutras, in the Yoga Sutra literature. And we have Jachantara Parinamaha Prakritya Purat. A wonderful, wonderful statement. A change into another species, in other words called biological evolution, is by what process? Not by a progressive random process or experimentation, but by filling in nature. And so this comes from Patanjali Yoga Sutras, as I say, 4th chapter. And we find it only in the 2nd sutra coming up. And here Patanjali has advanced a proposition that if there are some powers, because the whole chapter is in connection with this, then, in fact, it's the 3rd chapter there, in terms of powers, siddhis. It's suggested that these various capacities and skills and powers, they come by birth and maybe even sometimes by chemical means, and sometimes through discipline or mortification, through austerity. But Patanjali also admits that this body can be kept for any length of time, theoretically. And then after that, he goes on to state, what is the cause of the change of the body into another species? In other words, biological evolution. And he says this is done by filling in of nature. And then we have to require, or what is required is another explanation. What is that meant? Nimitam prayojakam prakritin varana vedastu tataha kshetrikvat. Good and bad deeds, behavior, are not really the direct causes in the transformation of nature. Behavior involving adaptation to the environment. And again, the modern evolutionary theory adds, we have to struggle, and it's the survival of the fittest, a kind of hostile environment where we do combat, tooth and claw. But this is a very different point of view. They're not the direct causes in the transformation of nature, but they act as breakers of obstacles to the evolutions of nature. That means the whole of our endeavor The whole of our advancement and so-called growth is to do with assessing obstacles and using our current equipment to get around them. And man can do this in a very deliberate way and enhance evolutionary process, let's call it unfolding, and do it in a conscious, deliberate, directed way. For example, instead of waiting around for some, let's say, thousands and thousands of years, millions of years to develop wings with the desire to fly, he just invents with his brain power an aircraft, and he's able to fly using all the aerodynamics available to him, scientific knowledge, the calculations, the careful design to reduce drag and create a lift using the air itself and the speed of the aircraft and enhancing it with a jet engine to lift the thing above the ground, even tons of it. So there are obstacles to this evolution with an urge, it seems, for us to overcome the obstacle. And then the explanation comes, in addition to that, as a farmer breaks the obstacles to the course of water, which then runs down by its own nature. Water's nature is to find the easiest route around and run. And you see, you can stop it by creating an obstacle. Well, nature gives us its own obstacles and also gives us the capacity to get around them, to go through them, to open the gates, as it were. So there's a commentary there which goes like this. The water for irrigation of fields is already in the canal, only shut in by gates. The farmer opens these gates and the water flows in, how? By itself. It doesn't have to be invited. It doesn't have to be transferred. It doesn't have to be to receive education for it. It simply flows in by itself. Its nature is to flow. And what's in the way? All progress and power in every man. Perfection is man's nature, only it is barred and prevented from taking its proper course. This is Swami Vivekananda's commentary on it. And so if anyone can take the bar or the obstacle off, in rushes nature, it fills in, and then a person attains the powers which are already his. Those who we call wicked become saints. A transformation takes place. As soon as the bar or the obstacle is broken and nature rushes in, this transformation takes place. It's nature that is driving us towards perfection, and eventually she will bring everyone there. That's a wonderfully positive affirmation, an assurance. So all we're suffering from is delaying tactics, a diversion, diverting our water for other things, probably useless things. So all these practices and struggles to become spiritual, to become religious and so on, are only negative work to take off the bars and open the doors to that perfection. And that perfection is our birthright. It's our own nature. So let's begin where we began. The simple principles of the Vedanta. There is one existence called Brahman. And that within us is called Atman, and it is the same. And all the obstacles are apparitional obstacles called mithya, to do with change, because these obstacles are temporary. And so Swami Vivekananda remarks, today the evolutionary theory, even in his day, of the ancient yogis, the evolutionary theory then of the ancient yogis, will be better understood in the light of modern research that is contemporary in his day. And yet the theory, he says, of the yogis is a better explanation, because in a flow you have all the components. You have variegation, you have things advancing, things held up, you have multiplicity, you have adaptation, and the water finds its easy way around. And natural selection then becomes a question of naturally removing the obstacles when the opportunity arises. It makes the whole of nature opportunistic, looking for a way around constantly, and therefore transforming things, one species into another. So we are again going back to where? To our own intrinsic nature. Now, if you take, for example, water flowing into a waterfall, let us take, for example, Niagara Falls, such an impressive thing. Or in my own country, let's take the Zambezi Falls, the Victoria Falls on the Zambezi River. The water in the Zambezi River, the waterfall after it, the water in the escarpment, the water down the road into a lake is the same water. It's all 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Water is water. The substance is always the same. The configuration is different. This gives us a totality of understanding, where from that point of view, we can say, how can I believe in change that you call evolution when I believe in totality? Totality, nothing changes, nothing moves from that point of view. So it's the same water. The same water in Lake Erie goes through Niagara Falls and down into other lakes. It's not different water. We call it differently because it's for convenience sake. We know the location is one place, location another place, and so on. But when you look at what is the substance, it's the same thing. So the 2 causes of evolution advanced by the moderns, says Swami Vivekananda, even in his day, which only has been added to through genetics, genetic drifts and studies like that, namely sexual selection and survival of the fittest. These are inadequate. And suppose human knowledge to have advanced so much to eliminate competition, Vivekananda points out, then both from the function of acquiring physical sustenance and acquiring a mate, well then, according to the moderns, that is in his day and even today, human progress will stop and the race will die. And the only thing that is added to it in the modern synthesis will be the genetic component, which is said not to have a kind of barrier on it, which is a kind of dogma imposed on it. And the idea that there is random mutation, and it is the random mutation that causes random adjustments and changes. But you see, modern study in physiology denies the primacy of this genome and tells us that there are many different aspects of the cell that organize themselves to overcome any mistake in copying, any mistake in the duplication is picked up, and these mistakes are rare. Imagine now if you have to take a text and copy it 1,000 times, there's bound to be 1 or 2 mistakes. There's a self-correcting mechanism in the overall cell that organizes and arranges it, a self-correcting mechanism that has behind it a high level of complexity, and we might even say its own intelligence. Why? It's because the source of it is inside it, enters into it, is the expression that the Upanishads have. And so with these understandings, he says that this type of evolution proposed by the yogis is a much better explanation. And according to the moderns, he says, human progress will stop and the race will die if the competition is eliminated by human advancement. And the result of this theory, he says, is to furnish every oppressor, this is the danger, with an argument to calm the qualms of conscience. Men are not lacking who posing as philosophers want to kill out all wicked and incompetent persons. They are, of course, the only judges of competency. Now, this is way, way before the rise of Nazism and euthanasia associated with it and so on, and eugenics. And so, thus, he says, preserve the human race by this selective, inhumane, materialistic outlook. So, he says that the great ancient evolutionist Patanjali declares that the true secret of evolution then is the manifestation of the perfection which is already in every being, that this perfection already in every being, this perfection has been barred, and the infinite tide behind is struggling to express itself, he says. So no doubt there are struggles, but it's a kind of struggle we witness with water trying to get past a barrier, not being held up in an eddy or current or a pool, with an urge to flow. The nature of flow is it wants to run, and it wants to take the easiest route. And so Patanjali declares that the true secret of evolution is this manifestation of the perfection already in every being. Nothing new to get is already there, and that this perfection has been barred. And these struggles and competitions are but the results only of our ignorance. We think that we are something separate. We think we have to advance. We think we have to defend ourselves. We think we have to attack. We think we have to make the selection. We only think that we are reductionists in some cases, that we are material beings like any other material beings, and we are gasping for breath and for survival, and we'll do anything to get it. This is called warfare. And he says, the struggles and competitions are but the results of ignorance because we don't know the proper way to unlock the gate and let the water in. This infinite tide behind, he says, must express itself. It must express itself. It is the cause of all manifestation that we notice and label as evolution. Taken in the proper way, evolution really means unfolding. Competitions for life or sex gratifications are only momentary, unnecessary, extraneous effects caused by our ignorance. And even when all competition has ceased, this perfect nature behind will make us go forward until everyone has become perfect. Therefore, there's no reason to believe that competition is necessary to progress. In fact, we should probably take the non-competitive gap at every opportunity. An example for that. When somebody wants to kick a ball in football, they have to raise a foot, even momentarily. An acute opponent will notice it and put the ball through. Because there's something unique in all of us, something that nobody else can do, some role we have to play, a divine kind of a divine slot for us, and we fulfill it nicely. It's called Swadharma, doing our own duty. And because of that, there's no need to compete, because we don't have any competitor. And we are only one. And in one, there's no competitor. Fearlessness arises when there are no two things. That's why we have such a beautiful sleep. In deep sleep, there's no second thing. There's no time, there's no space. There's just a kind of blank, a felt deep peace. And so, no competition is necessary to progress. And in the animal, what happens is man was suppressed. But as soon as the door was opened, out rushed man. And so in man, there is the potential God, he says, kept in by the locks and bars of ignorance. And when knowledge breaks these bars, the God becomes manifest. What a beautiful, beautiful commentary. So now let's go back really to our theme about it. You can put it in a different way. You can imagine that along with the yogis, some symbolic representation of this unfolding. Let us say that energy throughout the entire physical body and throughout our mental body, which entertains interests, which entertains feelings, thoughts of various kinds, creativeness, and so on. You can imagine this as a flow. Thought itself as a flow, as a current. When diverted here and there, it gets streamlined into individual streams. Let us take the energy that is involved in metabolism, involved in a cycle, that food is taken in and transformed into the cells of the body through enzymes, enzymic action, acting as catalysts, breaking the food down and created again a flow. We call it the bloodstream. And another flow we call the lymphatic system, with a convenient heart that pumps it all around. We don't ask that there be breath. Breath is automatically supplied. It flows in us and flows out of us. You must have noticed. Life is a constant flow. If we think in terms of flow, then we'll understand what has been told. Now, if you understand it as a flow, you'll see there's no individual possession of an energy. You cannot say it's my energy and nobody else has access to it. You can't say this is my private licensed air and I'm breathing it and you're not entitled to it. You can't say this is my sunshine and my sunbeams. It belongs to everyone. One thing we know about energy is it's universal and anybody can tap into any variation of it. Energy is one. This is not my idea. This is the idea exclusively of the yogis. This belongs to modern science also. And energy is always there. It can never be created. It can never be destroyed. It is only transforming the energy into different ways that makes the difference. Supposing we were to gather all the individual energy within an individual system from the universal storehouse of divine energy. We call this technically prana. And supposing you are able to systematically redirect it so that it has the effect of opening, not closing. Now, in the language that we've just been reading and studying, this closing effect is putting the obstacles there. And nature has provided these obstacles anyway and given us the capacity to remove them as we want, to open the gate or close it. Mostly we close it inadvertently because the chief barrier of all barriers, with all the subsidiary barriers there, is called ignorance. We don't know any better. We don't know that we have these obstacles. We interpret it in a very different way. And so by removing these obstacles, we are unfolding this tremendous energy that can be directed in a higher, nobler way that makes us devoid of pain. Because you'll notice that all these energy streams are diverted into physical energy, into mental energy, and mental energy is seen by the yogis as only a subtle version of the physical. If we are able to tap into this systematically with a scientific process, what will be the result? And the yogic language for it is this. You take all the scattered energy, psychic energy. The mind is normally in a scattered state. If we're able to bring it in, withdraw it to a centralized position, and then beam it systematically, beam it with full power of attention like a laser beam in a different direction that opens up different levels of consciousness, step by step, not all at once, progressively. Progressively means it's steady. Progressive means it's more likely to be sustained. Now you see, the ancient rishis in the Satya Yuga, let us say, in a different era, were able to bypass these steps and go directly. They used a system of discernment, analyzing the world into what is permanent, what is impermanent, what is real, what is unreal, what is useful, what is not. And with this absolute keenness of intellect and dedication, they were able to go directly, instantaneously, on one principle, that the perfection that they are seeking, as it were, is already available to them, already there. And if the chief obstacle is ignorance, why not remove that once and for all with the antidote called knowledge? Straight away. But now for most of us, we have to do it progressively. We don't have the keenness of intellect necessarily, or the dedication. And so, all right, let us patiently take a journey, an inward journey. The Katha Upanishad tells us that most people are looking outward through the senses and trying to adjust to an environment, as every other biological species does. But a wise person decided to do the reverse and then looked inward for the answer. This was the whole formula for the rishis, who are scientists. What is life? What is all this about? What is the source of everything? We won't find it outside. We won't find it in the outside called the body either. Nor will we find it in the inside of the mind, but we'll look at that. No, we didn't find any permanence there either. Then we looked in a more interior way. We took consciousness, our birthright, that was expressing itself outwardly, and turned it inward. And then what did we find? We found a progressive discovery that every layer that is opened up is more subtle, more immense, and more truthful, more pure. And so in the yoga's concept, these levels, 6 of them, 6 or 7, let's say, that they visualized as vortexes, disturbances, and various degrees of subtlety that are obscuring our vision. And how to deal with that? We take all that energy and pierce through these levels and layers of consciousness. And so, in the concept of the yogis, we begin at the very root of it, Muladhara. And Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, these lower levels, as it were, mystics such as Ramakrishna will tell us, these are really associated with the basic gut survival issues. And while we are seeing the subtleties of these, we are still orientated in our mind toward a more material view of things, even though it is inward still. And so, therefore, the very lowest is associated with the expressed element of Prithivi, not to be confused literally with earth, which is what its translation is in English, but with a certain principle, subtle principle that provides us with all smells or all odors and all noses that catch it. Interpreted now in a concrete way by the sense organs. And where does this come from? And what is its energetic force? Magnetism. And then what about the next one, whose force is electrical energy? Something that flows, Swadhisthana, literally whose element would be api, water, not literally water, unfortunately translated like that, but something that has the characteristic of water, namely a flowing thing. Electrical energy flows. That supplies us with all tastes and all mouths that correspond to it. And all senses, don't forget, are components within the whole mental field. No doubt, expressed through the instrumentality of the organs, eyes, ears, and so on. And where does all this come from? These are combinations, degrees of subtlety. And as with a penetrating vision, we are able progressively through spiritual discipline, love of God primarily, we're able to open up, make an opening up, like a beautiful, gorgeous flower, progressively opening up in slow time. And as it opens up, we see more of the inwardness of the flower. We get more of its fragrance, more of its beauty, unfolding until perfection is there completely. And so all of these combinations will come really from a certain radiation element, a subtle element which is there, called something that shines, or fire. And that produces all forms, all colors, and all eyes that see it. And where does all that come from? Now we've come to a critical moment, because there is the center that, according to yogic concept, will be in the heart. A 12-petaled lotus is how it's represented, indicating a total distribution everywhere. Vayu, with a structure like a Star of David inside it, two triangles, one on top of the other, in yogic symbology. And there, Vayu, that is something that is a characteristic of kinetic energy, something that is distributed everywhere and more subtle. And now the opening of love takes place. The real spiritual awakening takes place in this center. And as this unfolds more and more, we find it as a combination, and that combination comes from what we call Akasha. We can sometimes interpret it as potential energy, space, or potential matter, the unmanifest. It's also called a Vyakta, not to be confused with a Vyakta, pure potential nature, and a Vyakta, the highest supreme principle. And so we find the smallest possibility of tremor. And this is all to do with oscillations and vibrations, these subtle elements, these divine glories that come from only one thing. What is that? A cosmic creative mind, symbolized as Ajna Chakra, symbolized in the center of the forehead, corresponding to the king of all the glands. And so this is denoted as having the influence there in a certain center that represents for us cosmic mind. When you unfold systematically all of these glories, all of these subtleties, which are all divine expressions, we come to a position of cosmic mind, the creator. And settling within that, we find our personal God. Love of that God reveals all of this to us. This unfolding of this coiled energy called Kundali or Kundalini, the feminine aspect. In this system, termed feminine energy or Shakti, we are aiming to unite this Shakti with Shiva that represents the Parabrahman, the supreme principle. And symbolically, where do we find this? Well, we find it by going through the unmanifest nature. In Vedanta philosophy, we call this the Saguna Brahman, that Brahman that is omnipresent, omniscient, that has the potentiality for creation and preservation and so on. By itself, held in potentia, awaiting for its expression. Now, so far, what do we have? Well, we can reframe it in a different way. All our waking state is there. And our waking state is ruled by that divine element that is called Virat, that is called the ruler of the waking state. That is our common universe. It's the thing that science is studying. But then when it comes to the most fundamental of things, you must have heard of quantum physics or quantum mechanics, something that nobody knows anything comprehensively about. They only know how to use the principles of it. And the principles work very well. We're using it now over this broadcast. But it has separate rules, different rules. And because it's more fundamental, more real than the fundamental laws which we think operate in a deterministic way, that means that the fundamental basis of our existence is indeterminate, is working on the principle of probability and possibility, and is subtle, incomprehensible to our normal vision, because our normal vision is laboring under the mistake that we call ignorance. And even the discovery of the subtle elements, if we're taking them as also incomprehensible yet material, we're also making the mistake. And then when we come finally to understand it properly, in a relative sense, we see the tremendous blissful joy that we experience as we unfold more and more and more of what is our real nature, exposing more and more this perfection that lies inherently within us, and uncovering gradually with a sense of expectation and adventure and anticipation. Where's the next uncovering? Where's the next uncovering? What a joy, what a joy. With each one, more and more bliss. Until finally, Sahasrara, we get the whole totality. And in the whole totality, space is irrelevant, time is irrelevant, occupation of space is irrelevant, description is irrelevant. There the mind comes back together with words. It's not something that is subject to intellectual understanding. It is a paradox in the sense that, as the Ishu Upanishad tells us, and other Upanishads will tell us, you see, so it is near, but it is far. It is moving, but it is unmoving. It seems to move. The language is seems, because we have to funnel it into our limited understanding. And this great, great discovery, this ocean, as it were, that we experience a oneness of, that you can say is our goal, in the sense that each step was aiming at one thing, and yet we discover with each uncovering, it's already there with layers on the top. Bhagavad Gita gives us some wonderful analogies. Like a mirror covered with dust. Remove the dust. Like an embryo in a pregnant womb. It's hidden, but it's there. Like fire behind the smoke. So all of these kinds of analogies gives us an insight into, it's covered. There's a covering there. The remedy is, let's remove the covering, please. And let's do it systematically with the scriptural guidelines and the help of a teacher and the help of nature itself is urging us forward. In other words, if you want to put it theistically, God himself or herself is driving us from within, urging a union. And in the tantric language, between Shiva and Shakti, the supreme absolute and the relative, the energy and the source of it. You cannot have fire without its capacity to burn. You cannot have the sun without its rays. You cannot have water without its wetness. So this is the uncovering process which we're inherently on, and it's called evolution, uncovering. So as I say many times before, I can take a piece of paper and fold it. When I unfold it, I don't get anything new. There's one totality. But our view of it is not like that. Understanding our limitation, we try to uncover, to expand the truth of what is there. And I give the example, I remind you of it again, a funny example. And that is the example of frog scientists, because it's very amusing to see it. They want to discover what is a cone, and they want to discover it in a systematic scientific way, but they have one-dimensional deficiency. They have no vertical vision. They only can see horizontally. They can't look up, they can't look down. They get a professor, please teach us what is a cone. We are ready for it. Don't ask where they got the pens and paper and all of that, and the spectacles to look at it and so on. And then, of course, they experience it only as a point, because the professor lowers the cone into the water, and soon they see the birth. Register, we are happy to announce the birth of Mr. Cone. It's a point. But then as the cone gets lowered, it seems to evolve. And you can measure the rate of change, apparent change that takes place in it. And you can see the expansion. Finally, the professor lets the whole thing go. We regret to announce Mr. Cone died, but let's go back and discuss when it will reincarnate. Not understanding there was a totality there where no birth took place, no change took place, no evolution took place. It's impossible for that to happen with the totality. The totality remains a totality. What appears to be a change is simply our reading of a limited version of what is taking place, introducing this useful component of time to observe change. But when we take it away, we have the changeless. And when we take space away, we have the undivided. And when we take the limitations of things, we have the infinite. And this is why things fall to the ground. This is why things fly off. And this is why things don't wish to continue or accelerate until forced. Now we have an explanation really of the whole totality. And we have an explanation of what is evolution. And we can increase the rate of this so-called evolution. We do it systematically so that God jumps out, in Swami Vivekananda's illustrative language, that God jumps out of man once we remove the obstacle. And so what we discover as new species is simply obstacles being removed, driven by a desire. And once the desire is there for the ultimate truth, then that stimulates that more than desire, yearning. It yields then the enthusiasm and the mechanism to remove the final obstacle, namely man himself. And so these are some shared concepts with you about unfolding levels or layers of consciousness. We can leave it there, like that for this evening. So nice to see you all. I look forward to seeing you again in Dublin or wherever you are, whether it's Dublin, UK, France, wherever. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
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 Thank you, Swamiji.